It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Smooth and Savvy is joined by some of the hottest talent in the entertainment industry, from musicians to authors and all those in between. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here he is, Mr. Smooth and Savvy himself, Douglas Coleman.
Ho, hee, ha, ha, hee, ho. Welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show. It's me, Douglas Coleman. How are ya? How are ya? How are ya? We got another fabulous show today, another full interview. Today is all about movies. And the movie mom is here, Nell Minow. She'll be with us in just a few minutes. So grab your popcorn and relax. The one thing you don't want to buy at the theater when you go to the movies that I discovered as a kid is don't buy Junior Mints and wash them down with Coke, because there's some kind of a strange chemical reaction that happens in your mouth. I had that taste in my mouth for days after I bought those and ate the Junior Mints. It was terrible. I don't know what happens, but there's some kind of a strange reaction, and it was horrible. It tasted like, I don't know, antifreeze or something. I've never tasted antifreeze, but I'm guessing just something so foul like that. So don't mix Junior Mints and Coca-Cola. We will be right back.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Hey there, this is Douglas Coleman, host of the Douglas Coleman Radio Show. I wanted to let you know that we are now offering advertising slots on our show for just $5. Yes, you heard it right, just $5. That's cheaper than a McDonald's meal, and it's better for you too. I will mention your website and product on our show, or for just $10, I will play your pre-recorded ad up to 30 seconds in length. We are now an internationally syndicated show with listeners from all over the world. This is a great and inexpensive opportunity to gain some exposure for you and your product or brand, and your ad won't just play once. It will become a permanent part of the show, which will archive on YouTube, Mixcloud, and on Spreaker. So why not do it now to get the exposure you deserve?
Hi there, this is Stuart Epps from the UK, record producer, engineer. You might have heard of me. I've worked with artists from Elton John to Led Zeppelin to Bad Company, Twisted Sister, Robbie Williams, Oasis, many, many great bands and artists in the past and the present and hopefully in the future. But you can work with me as well. You know, all you got to do is get in touch with me on eppsmusicproductions.com. That's EPPsproductionsmusic.com. And I can help you with your productions and with your recordings. A lot of people do home recordings now, which you can only take so far. Maybe they need a bit of professional help. So get in touch with me and we can sort it out. And thanks for Douglas Coleman for giving me this spot. Thanks a lot. Cheers, bye.
And now...
Hey, Rocky, watch me pull a rabbit out of my hat.
Again?
Nothing up my sleeve. Presto!
Wrong hat.
I take a 7.5.
Now here's something we hope you'll really like.
She appears every week on radio stations across the country talking about new releases in theaters and on DVD, and has over 3,000 movie reviews at moviemom.com. Her articles have appeared in USA Today, Family Fun, Daughters, Parents, and the Chicago Tribune. She writes for BeliefNet and RogerEbert.com, also the Motion Picture Association's website, Where to Watch, and Huffington Post. She was Yahoo's movie critic for 6 years. Third edition of her book, The Movie Mom's Guide to Family Movies, will be published in 2016. She has been profiled in the New York Times, The Economist, Forbes, the Chicago Tribune, Working Woman, CFO Magazine, the Ladies' Home Journal, Washingtonian Magazine, and the Chicago Sun-Times, and has appeared as the Movie Mom on CBS This Morning, Fox Morning News, NPR, CNN, and dozens of radio stations. Okay, please welcome Nell Minow. Hi, Nell. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Oh, thank you for coming on the show. It seems like you've got a pretty good list of credentials here for doing movie reviews. How long have you been doing this as movie mom?
As movie mom for 20 years. I started in 1995. It's hard to remember, but in those days, there was not a single corporation or publication online. It was mostly college students and military people saying, here's a list of my 10 favorite links. And I decided to start putting movie reviews online, and the internet kind of grew up around me.
Now, you've written for, it says, the Chicago Tribune, USA Today, RogerEbert.com. What got you started doing this?
Well, I always loved movies, and I was always very opinionated. That's a really good combination. I started writing movie reviews from my high school and college papers, and then I went to law school, did other things for a while. And when the internet came along, that's when I knew that I had a place where I could start writing some more reviews. But I grew up in a very media-oriented family. My father, Newton Minow, was the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission in the Kennedy administration.
Wow.
And he caused a lot of ruckus in 1961 by telling the National Association of Broadcasters that television was a vast wasteland. And Sherwood Schwartz was so insulted by that when he created Gilligan's Island, he decided to get my father back by naming the sinking ship after him. But we thought it was pretty funny.
Oh, the SS Minnow? That's after your father?
It sure is.
Oh, that is funny. Wow, I learn something new every day.
So anyway, I grew up in a family that was very interested in media, very critical of media, but also very much appreciators of media. So it was something that I enjoyed. And I think the most important requirement really for being a film critic is kind of an infinite capacity for watching bad movies, because most people can't handle that. Most people like to see only good movies. And if you're really hardcore like me, then you don't mind seeing the bad ones too.
Now, you said your father was chairman of the FCC?
Yes.
Was he part of that, what was it called? The Hayes Commission or something? The ones that did all the censorship back in the day?
That was back in the 1920s. He wasn't even born yet. So no. And that's not the FCC. It's not a government organization. That's the industry policing itself. So no, he was not. But it's funny that you mentioned that, because I've been presenting a series of films on Capitol Hill here in Washington, D.C. that are called pre-code films, because they came out before the Hays Code was adopted. And people are always so very surprised to find out how racy they are.
Well, it was interesting to watch old television shows like I Love Lucy, I suppose is the classic one, where they had to sleep in separate beds.
Oh, it's worse than that. When she became pregnant, of course, in real life with the Desi Arnaz Jr., she wanted her character on the show to be pregnant so she could continue to work. And of course, it was an opportunity for many interesting developments on the show. But they said, all right, we'll allow you to be pregnant on the show, but you may not use the word pregnant. That was considered much too incendiary. So she had to use the word expecting.
Or did they say with child?
With child also, yeah. But pregnant was just too racy. It's hard to imagine when you consider the language that we see on TV now.
Oh, well, I mean, movies these days, God, what don't they show? I mean,
that's right.
Absolutely everything.
Well, that's exactly why I'm in this business, because the movie ratings, from the industry themselves really don't give parents the information they need. And so when I came back to writing movie reviews, I was a mother myself. And rather than the kind of reviews that I wrote in high school and college, I said I could really bring something extra here. I could, in addition to saying whether the movie is good or bad and what people should notice about it, I can also give parents the information they need so they can make the decision based on what's right for their families.
What is your criteria, first of all, for a good movie? And then we'll get into the ratings and all of that.
Well, that's a great question. And the answer is very much it depends. I guess I look for a movie that succeeds within the context of its own aspirations. Otherwise, every review you write is going to be, well, it's not Citizen Kane. So, if it's a teen comedy, or if it's an action movie like one of the Fast and Furious movies, I say to myself, how well does this movie succeed for the audience it's trying to attract? And if it succeeds well, if it delivers exactly what I think the audience is looking for from that film, then I'll give it a B. If it does not succeed in some way, I'll give it a B- or worse. And if it's significantly better than what audiences are likely to expect, then I'll give it a higher grade. So a movie like Zootopia, which came out a couple of weeks ago from Disney, was really not just a great film for kids. It was really a great film for families and had a lot of wit and charm that was beyond, I think, what people probably expected. And so I was happy to give that one an A minus. So, I try to look at each film based on its intended audience. And I don't look at, say, the new Divergent movie in the same way that I would look at, say, some of the movies that were nominated for Best Picture, like Carol or Brooklyn.
Okay, so your ratings and your reviews are not 100% just for family sort of guidance for kids. You rate everything that's out there pretty much?
Yeah. Believe me, families come in all ages and sizes, and I always say that I still talk about movies with my parents. So what I do is, and parents also, the really difficult movies are not the PG movies or the rare G movies. There's usually only one or two of those a year, but the PG movies, then you sort of know you're probably okay with an elementary school child, although I will flag issues that the Motion Picture Association does not, that might be of concern to some families. Like, say, for example, in Kung Fu Panda 3, there was a very sensitive issue of adoption that might be troubling for some families. So I try to flag those kinds of things. But of course, the real no man's land of the rating system are the PG-13s. And that's when the kids are in middle school and high school, and they're going alone. They're going with their friends and not going with their parents. And that's when parents really need good information about what's in the film. So yes, I will rate the film based on whether it's a good film or not. And then I will also give parents the information they need to decide whether it's right for their family and their child. I've got 2 kids myself, and movies that would have been right for one of them would not be right for the other. I had 2 kids, one of whom was never scared by a movie ever, and the other one who is like me and still thinks that Lassie's not going to get Timmy out of the well. I get scared very easily in movies.
Did you happen to see the movie? I wanted to ask you about a couple of movies that I just saw.
Okay.
One was called Cloud Atlas.
Yes, I have seen Cloud Atlas. I reviewed it.
What did you think of it?
Did you understand it?
No, I thought it was horrible.
What did you think?
I couldn't follow it. I could not follow it at all. And I had to go online and read the explanation for the movie. I hate when I have to do that.
Oh, well, see, now some people like that. And the book itself was famously very, very, very obscure. That movie, just for people who don't know, is based on a very intense literary book that is a very challenging book. The movie was made by the Wachowskis, who did The Matrix. They're not necessarily famous for kind of linear, straight ahead, we're going to spell it all out for you kind of filmmaking. And Cloud Atlas was a real labor of love. I thought some parts of it worked very, very well and some did not. It was really like 6 movies in one, wasn't it? Because it went back and forth in time from the distant past to the distant future. And I thought some of the segments worked very well. Some did not. One of the things I thought was interesting in the film, again, some parts of it worked well, some not, was that the same actors appeared as different races and genders in the different stories over time. And even if you're watching very carefully, I think some of those will surprise you when you see them in the end credits.
Well, that was interesting. Like you said, if it's like 6 movies in one, they should have made it as 6 movies because they could have chopped it up and each segment on its own was interesting. But
yes,
when it ran all together for 2.5 hours, I couldn't follow it. There were parts.
Well, I really hated the distant future one when they were all talking like Jar Jar Binks.
Yeah.
I didn't like that one at all.
The photography was very good in that. And I think it was noted that a lot of reviews that I've read about it said, well, the photography is really good. Which is like when you're describing somebody and you say, oh, they're very cheerful.
Well, it's like eating a restaurant meal saying, well, the plates were clean.
The plates were clean, right. Yeah. The service was slow, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I thought it was very ambitious and in some ways that paid off in some ways not. And I think that the general overall theme, and the Wachowskis can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I think the general overall theme was that over time, people became more aware of moral issues, moral failings, were kinder and more compassionate in each of the segments as time progressed. But I could be wrong about that.
The other one that I saw that was another one of those kind of movies was Mulholland Drive.
Okay, you've just described two of the most obscure movies of the last 15 years. I'm not sure if you don't like that kind of movie why you're seeking them out. But Mulholland Drive is a real head scratcher of a movie. And there again, it's several different stories going on from different perspectives,
Right.
and some work better than others. But if you want to understand Mulholland Drive, far and away, the best explanation of that movie is in an article on salon.com, SALON.com. It is worth seeing the movie just to read that article and figure out how somebody kind of solved that puzzle.
It would almost be better to read it first and then watch the movie. I think.
Some great performances, though. That was the first time I saw Naomi Watson. She really knocked me out in that movie.
Well, again, it was like parts of it were really good. And
Yeah. And parts of it were, what the heck?
right. And
What is happening here?
I mean, maybe I'm a bit of a masochist when it comes to movies because I do like a challenge with movies, but eventually I want to get it without having to go read a description. Like the other movie that was interesting was Inception.
I was just going to say, I hope you haven't seen Inception.
Okay, now that took me to
you are talking about some very obscure stuff.
Inception I watched twice, and after the second time I got it.
Okay.
That made sense. That made perfect sense because it was dreams, and it was just levels of dreams that they were going down with the purpose of getting the guy to have his father reconcile him and his father, right? The son and the dad. So, okay, I got that, It took me 2 times. But see, I like that because I knew I could figure it out. When I saw Mulholland Drive and when I saw Cloud Atlas, I said, there is no way that I am ever going to make any sense of this movie at all. And my point is, or my feeling is with those 2 movies, that they weren't supposed to make sense. I don't think there was
I don't think I would put it quite that way. I guess I would say that they intended the audience to come to their own conclusions. And I have to tell you a funny story about that. If you are interested in those kinds of movies, then Terrence Malick movies also fall into that category. And Terrence Malick has a new movie coming out this month called Night of Cups. Night like a night in armor, not night like day and night. And I just interviewed the 3 producers of the film, and I had a whole list of questions that I wanted to ask them about the film, which stars Christian Bale as a Hollywood screenwriter who has relationships with several different women over the course of the movie. And I had a bunch of questions I wanted to ask them, and every answer they gave me was, well, some filmmakers like to tell the audience what they're seeing, but Terry really likes to let the audience figure that out for themselves. And so we just are there to let that happen. And there's a funny article online about an actor named Thomas Lennon, who is in the film only for just a few seconds, but spent a whole day filming, where he talks about how there's no script. You show up. He basically doesn't tell you what is happening or why you're there or what character you're supposed to play, and he sort of lets it happen. And he said at one point it was going on so long that he had to call his wife and complain to her that he wasn't going to be coming home on time, and they got into a little bit of an argument on the phone, and he turns around and Terrence Malick was filming that because he wanted to put that in the movie. Well,
see, something like that almost sounds more like a documentary, though.
Oh, it's definitely not a documentary. There's almost no dialogue, and it's more like a mosaic. There's just sort of little pieces of half of a story here and a quarter of a conversation there that all get pieced together. And, then he'll throw in something like a dinosaur, and as he did in Tree of Life, and you've got to figure out what that is about. And it's very, I guess I want to say very intuitive, very fluid, and he really does leave it up to you. So it's like poetry. Some poetry will say, I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree. And you say, okay, I know what that poem is about. I know exactly what that poem is about. And some poetry is, like Gertrude Stein, a rose is a rose is a rose. And you have to figure it out for yourself.
Well, okay. I'm not convinced that there was a point.
I'm not going to argue with you about that.
But all right. I see what you mean. The other 2 movies that I was going to mention are completely different than those. Because I am a musician, I do watch a lot of music-themed type movies. And the two that I just watched, one was called Stoned, and the other one is called Love and Mercy. Have you seen those two?
I've seen Love and Mercy. I haven't seen Stoned. What did you think about Love and Mercy, which is the story of Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys?
Of the Beach Boys, right. I thought it was excellent. I thought it was fantastic.
Well, the part that I liked the best in it was the part that showed Brian Wilson, who's played by two different actors in the film, by Paul Dano as a young man and by John Cusack as a middle-aged man. The part where Paul Dano, as the young Brian Wilson, is in the studio and making good vibrations, and the way he interacted with the musicians, I thought was really, really, really well done. I just loved that.
Oh, and it was really true to life, because there are audio tapes of all of that, of the real Brian Wilson doing it. So to make the movie probably wasn't so difficult in the sense that they could just sort of follow all the audio trail that they had been left behind.
Right, and a lot of those studio musicians are still around. By the way, one of the great things about that whole era of music is that there are these fantastic documentaries like The Wrecking Crew and 20 Feet from Stardom about the people behind the scenes who helped make those incredible hits. And I'm thrilled that those people are finally getting a chance to tell their stories.
The other one's Stoned, which is the story of Brian Jones's death, basically. Mm-hmm. You know, he was allegedly, he drowned in his swimming pool.
Yes.
Months after he was kicked out of the Rolling Stones. Now, the movie, to me, I didn't think was very good, but not because the movie itself wasn't very good, because I didn't find Brian Jones to be a very interesting character. The way he was portrayed in the movie, he was very shallow, self-destructive, kind of not the brightest bulb in the package, and very self-centered. Mm-hmm. He just was the character. Now, whether he was like that in real life or not, I don't know. But the character that they portrayed as Brian Jones was a character that I didn't particularly like. So the movie didn't really do anything for me in that regard. Like, I'm going to watch it to try to learn more about this mysterious Brian Jones. Because if that's really how he was, then it didn't paint a pretty picture of him. The other thing about that movie, which I had to laugh about, is that there was an incredible amount of male frontal nudity.
Oh, my.
In this movie. Almost like gratuitous, like, well, why does he have to be naked here? You know what I mean? There was just like no reason for it. And I just kept laughing because it just was like, oh, come on, not again, you know? And
that's funny.
I don't know what that is. Is that something in the ratings laws that have changed where now that, because you never saw male frontal nudity ever.
Yes, that is fairly recent. And of course it is an automatic R rating. It used to be not allowed, or it would get an NC-17. Yep, that's now a thing. Just like, there have been so many different standards that have relaxed over the years. So that's just another one of them. And, in movies like Shame and, there's a Kevin Bacon movie where we're now starting to see that.
Oh, so that's the latest and greatest. So now we can show male frontal nudity.
Yeah, we can. We've had women for a long time. I guess it's fair play. There are so many fantastic documentaries about musicians, and there are great feature films about musicians too. I don't know if you're a Miles Davis fan, but I just saw Miles Ahead, which is the new Don Cheadle movie about Miles Davis. And of course, the music is the best part of that movie.
I want to see that. That's on my short list, as a matter of fact. I was wondering, now it's out already?
It's coming out. I get to see the movies before they're released. That's the thing about being a critic.
How long is it going to be until that comes out?
I think that's coming out in the next few weeks. Normally I get to see the movie 1 to 2 weeks before it opens, but in this one, they're trying to set up some interviews for me, so it may be a little bit longer. Now, I had some problems with the movie. Don Cheadle is great. Ewan McGregor is great, as I gather, a fictional character who's writing a story about him for Rolling Stone, but it really focuses on just a short little part of his life when he was really a mess. And you don't need me to tell you, if you're a musician, that a lot of musicians have extremely messy lives where they get involved with drugs and too many women, and they start to fall apart. And this really focuses on that part of Miles Davis's life and not on what made him a great musician.
Well, I am a huge Miles Davis fan, always have been. I saw him in concert a year before he died, and I'm so glad I went to that concert because it was one of the best concerts I've ever been to. He was good right up to the very end, but he did have a messed up life. I mean, from the documentaries I've seen and what I've read, he was a profoundly flawed human being, but he was an incredible musician, an incredible trumpet player, an incredible arranger, writer, performer. He had 4 kids from different women who none of them were his wives, and drugs was a real problem for him for a long time. Violence, yes.
Yeah, well, we see that over and over, whether it's the movie about Ray Charles or movie about the James Brown,
Right.
or the documentary about Nina Simone. I got to see her perform live. She was one of my favorites, and there's a very good documentary about her called What Happened, Miss Simone. It's always fascinating to kind of see the life and times of these great artists and see the pressure they're under and, what made them great and what made them human.
It's funny. There's a saying that I like where it says there's a fine line between genius and cuckoo.
Yeah, sometimes it's not too fine.
And, when you see somebody like Brian Wilson, since we were just talking about him, he really walked that line.
He crossed it.
He went back and forth, I think.
Yeah, he crossed it. And one of the things that's in the film, which is, of course, well known about him, is that he was preyed upon. He was a very vulnerable, fragile guy, and he was preyed upon by a self-proclaimed therapist who ran him like a dictator for his own purposes, kept him all drugged up, and what part of the story of the movie is that he met a woman who really saw through to who he really was and was able to free himself from that.
What did you think of the movie? We're going to take a classic here. Let's do a couple of classic movies.
Okay.
What did you think of the movie Goodfellas?
Oh, actually, I was writing about Goodfellas just this morning. That's one of my absolute favorites.
Oh, great.
I'm a huge Martin Scorsese fan, and that of course, that incredible camera work in that nightclub scene is one of the greatest moments in the history of movies. Brilliant performances by everybody, and a really powerful film. And I'll tell you the reason I was writing about it. On Monday, HBO is going to have a special documentary about the writer and director, Nora Ephron. And one of the things that I talked about as I was writing about, and it will be on my website on Monday, is that Nora Ephron was married to Nicholas Pileggi, who wrote the book that Goodfellas was based on.
Oh.
She wrote a movie that I think is kind of a neglected gem. People have forgotten about it, but it's a great movie called My Blue Heaven with Steve Martin and Rick Moranis. And it's almost like the same story as Goodfellas as a comedy, because it's about a guy in the witness protection program and his relationship with his FBI agent. And it's very, very funny. And I'm sure she got the idea from living with the guy who wrote Goodfellas.
Okay, so we got that one. And let's see, let's just move backwards a little bit.
Okay.
Midnight Cowboy.
That's a brilliant film. That was, of course, the only Oscar-winning Best Picture ever to be released with what was then an X rating. It's now an NC-17 rating. And just to show you how things have changed and how those standards have been relaxed, it now gets an R rating. Maybe sometime in the future we'll get PG-13. But beautiful performances from everybody, and of course, an unforgettable theme song.
Oh, okay. Now let's go back another decade.
Okay.
A Star is Born with Judy Garland.
Well, you may know that movie was made 3 times.
Right.
The third time with Barbra Streisand and Chris Christopherson. First time with Janet Gaynor. It was based on the real life story, a young actress who married a fading star. And the Judy Garland version is a little too long, but it's a wonderful movie, and those musical numbers are fantastic. The Born in the Trunk number is great, but one of the all-time best musical numbers in movie history or in human history has got to be Judy Garland singing The Man That Got Away.
I agree with you. And, that was my favorite of the three. I didn't like particularly the Barbara Streisand, Chris Christopherson one.
I'm with you. I'm with you on that.
It was just a little too sappy, I think would be the word to use.
It doesn't hold up as well over time. Yeah.
Well, let's see. How far back can we...
They're talking about making it again, by the way.
Oh, God. Who's going to do it this time?
I don't know. Maybe Taylor Swift. I don't
Oh,
know.
please. No, don't even go there. That would just be sacrilegious. Absolutely.
Well, yeah, I like Taylor Swift. I'm not sure she's an actress, but we'll see. I think each generation kind of gets their own A Star Is Born, and so we'll see what happens.
Well, if they're going to do that, they might as well do it with Justin Bieber. Let's see. Going back to, that was 1950s, right? Was that in the or early 60s? Was that one?
50s. That was the 50s.
So if we go to the 40s, what do we got there? Citizen Kane. Okay, so.
Yes, Citizen Kane, probably, in my opinion, the greatest film ever made. And if anybody wants to learn anything about how to watch a film or how to think about a film, I recommend that you watch Citizen Kane and then watch it a second time with the Roger Ebert shot-by-shot commentary, which is one of the greatest experiences any film lover can ever have. It's absolutely brilliant. I'll tell you one thing I learned from that I think will really shock you, even more than the SS Minnow story. And that is that Citizen Kane had more effects shots in it than the original Star Wars.
Is that right?
Yep.
Wow. Well, no, I love Citizen Kane. This is definitely a classic.
Yeah, and he walks you through it, and you will see it with new eyes as he tells you to look where the camera was placed, and then he'll say, now, I talked to Joseph Cotten about filming this scene, and he said that Orson Welles said this to him. I mean, it's just, he looks at it from every possible angle, and you will not just look at that film differently, you'll look at every film differently forever after.
Did you know Roger Ebert?
Yes, I did. He was a great mentor for me, and every year I attend his film festival. It's still going on, even though he is gone. And I'll be there next month in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, presenting one of the films, although I'm not sure which one yet.
Yeah, I always enjoyed that show. I always liked that.
Oh, I did too.
I was sad when he died. Yeah.
It was very sad, but I'll tell you something. If you want to have a real treat, you must watch the documentary about Roger Ebert called Life Itself. It is not just a great story about a great man who learns to love very late in his life. It is one of the best love stories you'll ever see in a movie, ever.
Okay, I'm writing all these down, by the way.
Good, I hope so.
My short list of the movies is getting longer and longer.
Good.
And I'm talking to you. Okay, so let's see. That was now the 30s. Honestly, the only two films I can remember from the 30s are The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind.
Those are pretty great movies. They both came out the same year, and I'll tell you something else that they had in common. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. They each had 4 different directors, and they each ended up with the same director, Victor Fleming. So he had a heck of a year in 1939.
He certainly did. There were a lot of wives' tales about the Wizard of Oz.
Yes. Many of them are true, and some of them are not true.
Okay. Well, I know that the one where the Munchkin hanged himself in the scene.
That's not true.
That's not true.
No.
And you know how I know that now is because now that the film has been digitized, it's really obvious. But back in the old days when it was on TV, it was hard to tell.
Yeah, we didn't have HD TV in those days.
Right. Just the old cathode ray tube type. And it was really difficult to tell. You say, well, it kind of looks like a Munchkin hanging himself. But
yeah, there's a bunch of movies that have those kinds of urban legends. 3 Men and a Baby is another one, and that one also is not true.
Let me think. What was it?
I'll tell you one that is true.
For The Wizard of Oz?
No, not for The Wizard of Oz. For Indiana Jones, for the first one, Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Oh, okay.
The bad guy, at one point, while they were filming the take, a bug crawled in his mouth and he just swallowed it. And he said, well, let's do it over. And they said, no, we'll leave it in. So if you look, you can see him swallowing a bug.
Yeah.
I know, but it sort of worked for the character.
Well, that's dedication for you.
The show must go on.
Let's go back to The Wizard of Oz because I'm curious about, I know Buddy Ebsen was originally cast to do the Tin Man, but then he had an allergic reaction to the makeup.
To the aluminum, yeah.
To the aluminum.
He did. He was hospitalized.
Yeah. Okay, give me one that's true then.
Well, it is true, not quite so badly as the legend has it, but it is true that the Munchkins got up to some shenanigans. while they were filming. And it's also true that the studio offered an enormous amount to borrow Shirley Temple from 20th Century Fox to play the lead, and they wouldn't give her up. And so that was how Judy Garland, who was too old for the part, she was already 17 years old, was cast.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know Shirley was... I did know that, okay, on the other film that we mentioned, Gone with the Wind, Katharine Hepburn was originally slated to play Scarlett. Is that correct?
Well, she wanted to. She was. They
or
never
she tested
wanted her.
for
I
it,
mean,
right?
Yeah, one thing. Katharine Hepburn was a great, great, great actress, one of the best of all time. But there was no way that she could be from anywhere from New England or anything but upper class. She just had that sort of elegance about her and those New England, flinty tones. And so she was never seriously in consideration. Same with Bette Davis, who was so angry about not getting cast that she made Jezebel, a very similar kind of movie, that same year. And Miriam Hopkins, who really was from the South and who never lost her Southern accent, she tried very hard for the part. Paulette Goddard tried hard for the part. Everybody wanted it, and they delayed it so long that it was literally, they were filming, I said, well, while we're waiting to figure out who's going to play Scarlett, let's film some of this other stuff. They were filming The Burning of Atlanta. And the producer's brother brought visiting British actress Vivien Leigh to watch The Burning of Atlanta. And they said, there she is. She may be British and she may not have green eyes, but she's the one. We'll put green lights into her eyes and we'll teach her how to talk like a Southern belle.
Well, she did a pretty tremendous job.
She was fantastic.
You mentioned Paulette Goddard. This is a great segue because the next movie I was going to do would be the 1920s. And Paulette Goddard was Charlie
Modern
Chaplin's.
Times?
Well, I was gonna say The Kid.
Oh yeah, yeah. She was great. I think Paulette Goddard should be better remembered. She's a great favorite of mine. She's wonderful in one of my favorite movies, another 1930s movie, The Women, that has all of the top women stars of the era in one of just the most witty, cutting, trenchant comedies ever made. And yeah, she's great in The Kid. She's great in Modern Times. She just had a wonderful, sort of very fresh, energetic attitude about her. Very pretty. She was just great.
She was married to Chaplin?
Yeah, she was married to Chaplin. She was married to Burgess Meredith. And she was married to the writer, Eric Maria Remarque. And not too shabby.
I'm trying to think which wife was she to Chaplin?
Chaplin?
It was like his third or fourth.
Yeah, it's hard to say because he was involved with a lot of different women, not all of whom he married. So I think she may have been like his second wife, and then his final wife, of course, was the daughter of Eugene O'Neill, Una O'Neill.
Una O'Neill, right. The one thing I do like about silent films is that they can appeal to a much bigger audience than ones that have speaking, because you can appeal to people who don't necessarily speak English. Mm-hmm. And I think that's to some degree that's kind of a lost art because now we've got subtitles and everything.
Yeah. When I saw the British film Mr. Turner, I had to turn the subtitles on because I couldn't understand a word they were saying. And they were speaking English. It was just English with a very thick accent. And also he growled a lot. So that's true. Now remember that even silent films had title cards. In fact, that's how Alfred Hitchcock got his start. He was writing title cards for a movie company. And so I can't say that you don't need to know language at all, but certainly there was a charm and a mystery about those silent films that is wonderful. And one of the things that we do every year at Roger Ebert's Film Festival, which is now called Ebert Fest, is every year we show a silent film with live orchestral accompaniment from a group in Boston called the Alloy Orchestra that specializes in doing film accompaniment. And that is always one of the highlights. And there is just something very, very exciting about those old films.
Well, I guess it's the difference between reading a book, perhaps, and watching a film, where it allows your imagination to sort of fill in the blanks.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was fun that the artist got the Oscar just a couple of years ago, the first silent film since the first Oscars to win, and I thought that was really, really nice. there are still a few filmmakers that will go for silent or almost completely silent films. Jacques Tati, the French filmmaker, made a couple of the funniest films ever made. And as you say, you don't have to speak French, you don't have to speak anything to understand what makes him so good.
Well, also the Mr. Bean movies are very limited dialogue.
He's very influenced by Jacques Tati, as is, believe it or not, Jackie Chan.
Oh, okay. Well, Jackie Chan, is very visual. He doesn't need to speak that much. He can just move around. Like Bruce Lee. I mean, Bruce Lee's movies, the dialogue was pretty awful.
Pretty basic.
But nobody cared because they just wanted to see Bruce in action.
Yeah, he was really something.
He was incredible. Speaking of French films, one that just popped into my head as a young boy, I remember watching it, The Red Balloon. Do you remember that one?
Of course I do. There was an anniversary special re-release of it just a couple of years ago. That was one of my favorite films. When I was a little girl, I also had the book, which was just photographs taken from the movie. And it's a wonderful story that is a great family film about a little boy who is befriended by a red balloon that follows him everywhere, and about sort of the adventure of his day with this balloon.
I thought that was a great movie. I remember seeing it in grade school long before VCRs, when they would wheel in the 16 millimeter projector, and we'd get to watch that as a treat. And I think it certainly was a treat, because I remember being fascinated with that movie.
Yeah, it is a wonderful, enchanting movie, and the filmmaker was working with his own son, who played the little boy, and so there's a sort of a confidence and an intimacy about it that just works very, very well. It's absolutely great movie.
Well, okay, I think we've pretty much covered the century for movies. I did want to get back to specifically when you're dealing with ratings or suggestions for children and what parents might think is too violent, too sexual. Isn't that to a certain degree subjective based on what the parents feel is appropriate for their kids? Or do you think there is a general guideline that's sort of acceptable to, let's just use Americans as the example?
Well, that's a great question. And the answer is, of course, it depends very much on each family's own ideas and each child. As I said, I have two children, and the same movie that would be appropriate for one of them at age 8 would not have been appropriate for the other one at age 8. And so that's why I don't try to say to parents, well, if they're 7.5, they can see it, but not if they're 7. I don't do that at all, because you have to know your own child and your own family's values and your own situation. As I said, with Kung Fu Panda 3, there's an issue that would be great sensitivity to families with adoptive members, but I don't think that means they shouldn't see it, but they should certainly know about it and talk about it going in so that it leads to a good conversation. And so what I do is I don't say, my employer requires me to give a suggested age range, but that's just a starting point. What I say to people is, I will give you the information you need so that you can make the right decision for your family. I'm not going to tell you what that decision should be. That doesn't mean I don't have opinions. I mean, a local theater out near me in Washington, D.C. has just adopted a policy that children under the age of 6 will not be allowed into R-rated movies after 6 o'clock at night. I mean, think about that for a minute. Why should they ever be? I understand the parents can't always get a babysitter, but are you kidding me? They should not allow any children ever into an R-rated movie. So there are, some kind of hard and fast rules. I can just say with confidence, there's no R-rated movie ever that is appropriate for a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old, an 8-year-old, or going on up to, 15 or 16. But nevertheless, I am very much in favor of letting each family decide what's right for them. Although I will say this, I was standing in line to go to a movie, which I don't do that often because, as I said, I get to go to special critics screenings. But I was standing in line to go to a movie at a multiplex that had a bunch of different movies. And I saw the woman in front of me who had a small child, maybe 7 years old, buying tickets for Brokeback Mountain. And I just couldn't help myself. I said, excuse me, I think you need to know going in that this movie has some very tough material, including a brutal beating and a suicide. And she said, oh, really? I just wanted to lock her up and take that child away from her. That's just awful.
She thought it was just a cowboy movie.
I don't know what she thought.
Maybe it was Sister
A
Kid.
lot of times parents will say, in a moment of complete and total idiocy, they will say to me, well, it's just over their head. Well, I hate to tell you, but, item number 1 in the job description of being a child is figuring out all the stuff that they don't understand. That's what they do. That's what childhood is all about. And you don't get to tell them, you don't get to pick what they are going to figure out and what they don't. And that's really sad to me, because as I was writing my book, The Movie Mom's Guide to Family Movies, I interviewed a lot of people who were in their late teens and early 20s, because I figured they were young enough to remember what it felt like to see films as kids and old enough to kind of reflect on it and have some perspective. And every single one of them, I was really shocked. Every single one of them had immediately knew of some totally inappropriate film that they were exposed to when they were much too young. And their voices just shook. Even the really tough characters, their voices just shook as they talked about it. So I have to tell you a story, which is that my sister-in-law told me that she wanted to take my niece, her daughter, to see Bambi when she was 4 years old. I'm sure you know what I said, which is Bambi is a very upsetting movie because, it's been upsetting people for generations. I think 4 is too young. And she said, well, what's so upsetting in it? And I said, well, there's a terrible forest fire and Bambi's mother gets shot. She said, well, I think she can handle that. I said, well, I'm not recommending it. So she said, it's going to be fine. We're going to sit near the door. If she doesn't like it, we can leave. And we're going to, I'll bring her blankie with her, and it's going to be fine. I said, okay, well, let me know how it goes. So she called me back and she said, all right. I took her to the movie and she was fine in the forest fire and she was fine when the mother got shot. But she totally lost it at the end of the movie. Now, do you remember what happens at the end of Bambi? Because nobody remembers this.
No, I don't. It's been a while since I've seen that one.
All right. Well, I didn't see it till I was 38 years old because my mother didn't let me see it when I was a child. Let me tell you, I was plenty upset at 38. Okay. So this is what happens at the end of Bambi that nobody remembers. Bambi grows up. He becomes a stag. He's not a little fawn anymore. So my little niece sees this and she starts sobbing. And she said, where's Bambi? Where's Bambi? Well, believe me, this is not the time to explain puberty to a 4-year-old because Bambi doesn't sound like Bambi anymore. He doesn't have little white spots on his back. He's got these big, heavy horns, and he's got an adult male voice. And you can say to a 4-year-old, children grow up and become adults. That doesn't mean they can really understand what that means. And so you could not persuade this child that Bambi was still alive. And she was absolutely beside herself. And that's why I don't recommend taking anybody, any child under age 5 to a feature film because their understanding of the world is just not together enough for you to be able to handle a situation like that.
Well, I agree. Now, I've got a story for you.
Okay.
For one that I was. Back in the late 70s when I was in high school, one of the goriest movies that my friends said that you got to go see was Alien, the original one.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, that's pretty gory.
Okay, where the thing comes out of her stomach, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, my friends were getting sick left and right at the theater. They were, oh, God, I can't. And they would leave and, okay. And I sat right there and went, oh, well, this is interesting. It didn't bother me a bit. Mm-hmm. The next year, we went to a movie that I could not sit through. And I left absolutely horrified, crying, shaking. It was Ordinary People.
Really?
Because
Isn't
the woman that played Mary Tyler Moore,
right,
was so much like my mother. It was frightening. Aww. It was just frightening. She looked like her. She sounded like her. Things she said were like, I remember things that my mother had said like that. And it upset me so much I walked out of the theater. And to this day, I cannot watch that movie without having an emotional reaction.
Well, but that's my point, is that in my reviews, in addition to my, regular, this is what I think as a critic, I try to tell parents what's in the movie so that they can understand themselves whether it's something they want to see. Now, my longtime friend is a big, tough, strong guy, 6'6", very physically powerful. He cannot handle it in a movie if there's any animal that is badly treated. So you got to, so I have to always warn him not to go to particular movies. So like John Wick, he wouldn't mind that there's like 15 people that get killed in that movie. The fact that the dog is hurt, he would have to get up and leave. He could not handle that at all. And in fact, there's a website called doesthedogdie.com that you can check it out. So when you're thinking about going to that Marley movie or My Dog Skip, you can check it out and find out if the dog makes it to the end of the movie or not.
I think that's probably a good idea. And I think you're right. People have no problem seeing 500 people get shot. But if one dog dies, forget it. That's it.
Yeah. Well, and I got a lot of complaints when I did my review of Titanic. Which is PG-13, a lot of people wrote and they were furious that I said, I guess I said it was all right for middle school. And they said, but you can see her bare breasts. She's nude in one scene. And I'm like, okay, there's 150 dead bodies in the movie floating by the Titanic. And you got a mother singing her children to sleep, knowing that they're all about to die. That didn't bother you. The fact that she had her shirt off bothered you. So, as I said, I just tell them what's in the movie. I let them make a decision based on what's right. But it drives me nuts when parents will say to me in this very smug way, we don't care about violence. We just care about sex. And then some of them will say, we don't care about sex. We just care about violence. And my view is it's all about the context. Sometimes sex is presented in a thoughtful, intelligent, illuminating way, and sometimes not. And the same thing with violence. You can't make a blanket statement about either one.
I agree, except that I would prefer, now I don't have any kids, but if I did, I would prefer them to see sex over violence.
Okay, that's fine. But still, I mean, I can show you teen sex comedies where sex is portrayed in an extremely unrealistic and irresponsible way. And you might not think that was that was better than, say, for example, some car chase movie.
Well, okay, let me add this to it. In this country, we define nudity as sex, and nudity
Right.
just in itself is not sex.
Right.
But a lot of people say, oh, if there was a bare breast, it's sexual content.
Right.
And see, I disagree with that.
Sure.
Just
it depends.
like,
I mean, you can go to any museum in the country
right.
and you're going to see Greek statues of nudes. That doesn't make it sexy.
Right. And, there's a lot of places more in Europe than in America, but where people walk around in nudist camps and it's not about sex. It has nothing to do with sex. We have a strange perception of that in this country more than in other countries.
I totally agree with you.
One of the things also with violence is that you can show somebody getting shot without actually seeing the bullet go through them and blood coming out the back. And, there's degrees of violence. There was one Sylvester Stallone movie. I forget which one it was, but he goes up a river in maybe Vietnam or Cambodia or someplace looking for somebody. And it was the first time I had seen that particular effect where you actually could see the bullets. It wasn't just the squibs with the blood. You actually saw bullets. Yeah. Do you know the movie I'm talking about?
No, but I know the effects you're talking about.
Yeah, and I thought, oh, that's just too much. It didn't add anything to the story.
Well, okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate with you for a moment and say that there's this category in the world of movies and television called action violence, which means bloodless violence, basically. And you can say, well, that's not too disturbing. But on the other hand, studies show that it gives such a completely inaccurate portrayal of violence that people who have been exposed to a great deal of it go out into the world and they have no comprehension of what actual violence is, and they make bad judgments based on that.
Well, okay, one could argue that the Roadrunner and the Coyote, where he's dropping an anvil on him every 10 seconds,
sure,
pretty much gives an inaccurate portrayal of violence, too, because he just pops right back up again.
Exactly. Well, and there are people that do make that point, but I think that even a very young child knows that cartoons are not real. And to put it in a real alley with guns, and yet no blood spurting out, or to have people get shot and jump right back up, as often happens in PG-13 movies, does convey very powerfully an inaccurate idea. And if you are a teenager and you decide to go out and imitate some of that behavior, you will find out that it's not nearly so neat and clean.
Well, right. Police officers have also stated that, when you watch a gunfight in a movie, it's nothing like a real one. Absolutely
Of course
nothing.
not. Of course not. And I remember my son is a boxing fan, and I don't care for boxing, but occasionally I would come in the room and he'd be watching a boxing fight. And I couldn't figure out why it seemed odd to me. And then I realized I was just so used to movie fights where there's such a loud sound when somebody hits somebody, and it's not like that in real life in a boxing match. And also, generally speaking, in movies, there'd be one big punch and the guy would go down. And that certainly does not happen in real life in boxing.
Now, we are running out of time, but I did want to ask you one last question. This is something that was a bullet point on your bio that you sent me that I laughed when I read it. So I wanted to find out what this was about. It says, Why do Disney movies always kill off a parent?
That is the question that I get. That's the third most often question that I get asked. Okay. First most often is, my child gets scared by something, what do I do? And the second most often is, I'm super careful, but when they go over to somebody else's house, what do I do? Okay, so this is a question I get asked all the time, and the answer is very simple. Before there were Disney movies, there were stories. And before there were stories that were in books, there were stories that were told around the campfire. And the one thing they all had in common is that the parent has to be done away with. So that even if you take, say, Tom Sawyer, of course, Huckleberry Finn had no mother. His father dies in the book. And Tom Sawyer, whose mother, the character is Aunt Polly, who is based on Mark Twain's own mother. But in the book, she's his aunt because he can't have a mother. Or Alice in Wonderland, she's got a mother somewhere, but we never see her. Of course, Dorothy lives with Auntie Em and Uncle Henry. You have to get rid of the parent because if the parent is there, the child cannot have an adventure. And if Dorothy's mother was there in Oz, she'd be saying, I'm sorry, you cannot go on the yellow brick road today. You've got homework and you don't have a sweater and don't talk to strangers. And it's part of the role that stories play that the child has to have the opportunity to kind of imagine themselves in an adult role, meaning being responsible for themselves. So if Cinderella's mother were alive, she would not have to be making these important decisions. She would not have to learn how to take care of herself. And that's really the role that stories play. They're kind of like dress rehearsals for our emotions. And they're a chance for us to project ourselves into a situation where we can, reassure ourselves that we can take care of ourselves. And so, if you look at Roald Dahl books, like James and the Giant Peach, the parents get gored by a rhinoceros, which is, that you got to get rid of them one way or another. And if you look at any story about children throughout history, pretty much that's the case.
Well, that's very interesting. I never thought of that at all. So I'm glad I asked that question.
There's one more reason, too, that I should mention. And that's this, if you're talking about Shirley Temple movies, this is an important one. And that is that if the parents are both there, you can't really have a love story. I mean, a child can have an exciting, adventure. A child can be in a comedy. A child can be in a mystery. A child can be in a musical. What they can't have is a love story. And so you want to bump that up a generation. And so in all of the Shirley Temple movies but one, she had a single parent who fell in love during the course of the movie. And that one, she had estranged parents that she brought together. But that's a love story, of course. And if you want to have a love story in a movie, then you got to have a single parent.
Well, that's interesting. I'm trying to think. You know what? Even the Partridge Family, come to think of it. Yeah.
Sure. The Partridge Family, My Three Sons.
Right. Courtship of Eddie's Father.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that's one of my favorites. I love The Courtship of Eddie's Father.
What was the other one? Family Affair.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was a lot more of them than I thought.
Yeah, so that's the reason.
Interesting. Well, Nell, thank you so much. This has been really informative, very fun. I love talking about movies. Your website is called moviemom.com. It says you have over 3,000 reviews. Do you have them all?
Well, I told you, I've been doing it since 1995, so yeah.
Wow. Okay, Nell. Well, listen, thank you very much for coming on the show. It was a pleasure having you. It was a pleasure being on
the show. Thank you.
Well, that's about all the time we've got for the show today. I want to thank my special guest, Nell Minow. This is Douglas Coleman